The boy was building a grave. That was the consensus in Blackwood Ridge. He was digging his own tomb, right there on the north slope where the winter winds came to kill. They watched him from a distance, farmers leaning on their fences, the blacksmith pausing with his hammer in the air, women shaking their heads as they drew water from the town well. They saw the boy, no more than 17 years of age, working not on a foundation, but in a pit. His name was Elias, and he was an orphan. His parents had been taken by the fever 3 years prior, leaving him a parcel of land nobody wanted, and a leather-bound journal filled with strange diagrams. He was an outsider, not by birth, but by circumstance, and now by choice. Every other cabin in the valley sat proud in the open, facing south to catch the thin winter sun. They were built on stone foundations that lifted them from the damp earth, their peaked roofs designed to shed the rain. This was the way it was done. This was the way Master Thorne had taught them all to build. But Elias was digging. He had cleared a space not in the meadow, but deep within the densest thicket of pine trees, a place so dark and tangled that most men avoided it. There, with his father's shovel and an unyielding stubbornness, he was carving a hole into the earth. 4 feet deep, 18 feet wide, 24 feet long. "He's planting a house," one farmer chuckled to another, "hoping a proper one will grow by spring." The joke made its way through the valley, passed along with a shake of the head and a pitying glance toward the boy's lonely homestead. Master Thorne himself had come to observe the folly. He was a man built like an oak barrel, with hands that could snap a fresh board in two. He had built nearly every sound structure in Blackwood Ridge. His word on wood and stone was law. He stood at the edge of the clearing, arms crossed over his chest, his shadow long in the late autumn light. He watched Elias haul another bucket of dark soil from the pit. Thorne did not laugh. He scowled. This was not just foolishness. It was an insult to the craft. "The boy is a fool," Thorne declared later that evening at the tavern. His voice carried the weight of absolute authority. "He builds in shade, inviting the damp. He builds in the ground, inviting the frost. The pines will drop their acidic needles and rot his roof, and their snow-laden branches will be the hammer that breaks it. He's building a coffin, not a cabin." The men around him nodded in solemn agreement. They trusted the conventional wisdom. They trusted Master Thorne. The boy Elias was a lost cause, digging his way to a cold, lonely end. Elias heard the whispers. He felt the stares. But he did not listen to them. He listened instead to the rustle of pages in the evening, the faint scent of ink and time rising from his grandfather's journal. It was not a book of words so much as a book of secrets. The script was from the old country, a land of unforgiving mountains and winters that lasted half the year. His grandfather had filled it with detailed drawings, precise measurements, and notes scrawled in the margins. "The earth remembers warmth," one note read. "The trees break the wind's teeth." This was not foolishness, it was forgotten knowledge. His grandfather had not been a carpenter, but a survivor. The journal was a testament to that survival, a blueprint for living where nature was not an adversary to be conquered, but a force to be understood and respected. The first principle was the simplest. The ground was not cold. Below the frost line, the earth held a steady, constant temperature. It was a thermal battery, storing the memory of summer's heat deep within its core. To build into it was to borrow its strength, to wrap your home in the planet's own embrace. The second principle was about the trees. The dense pine thicket was not a hazard, it was a shield. The interwoven branches formed a living wall, a natural breakwater that would dissipate the force of the winter gales before they could ever touch his home. "The wind comes down that valley like a freight train," his grandfather had written. "So you must hide from the tracks." So Elias dug. The work was brutal. The soil was rocky and dense, fighting him for every inch. His hands, soft from a youth spent with books, were soon a raw mess of blisters and cuts. He would smear them with pine sap at the end of each day, the sticky resin hardening into a second skin. His back ached with a fire that never fully extinguished, a constant reminder of the weight of the earth. Par, he worked from the first hint of dawn until the last ray of light failed him. He ate little, a heel of bread and some dried meat, his focus entirely on the task. His world shrank to the dimensions of the pit, the scent of damp earth and pine, the rhythmic scrape of his shovel against stone. One evening, a new presence entered his small world. A dog, pale as a wisp of smoke, with ribs showing like barrel staves and eyes filled with a deep, ancient caution. It watched him from the edge of the trees, a ghost in the twilight. Elias said nothing. He simply left a piece of his salted jerky on a stump. The next morning, it was gone. He did it again the next night and the next. After a week, the dog was no longer at the edge of the woods, but at the edge of the pit, its tail giving a single, hesitant thump against the ground. Elias started calling him Ghost. The dog became his silent partner, his only companion. Ghost never barked, but his presence was a comfort, a quiet validation that he was not entirely alone in his endeavor. He began to raise the walls. He used the pines he had cleared, felling them by hand with an old axe. He notched them with a precision that surprised even himself, the muscle memory of some long-dead ancestor seeming to guide his hands. The walls rose from the floor of the pit, 4 feet of their height already sheltered by the earth. The design was unconventional. The walls were double-paned, so to speak. An inner wall of thick-fitted logs and an outer wall of stacked cordwood set 2 feet away. The gap between them he packed painstakingly with a mixture of sawdust, moss, and dry clay. It was a tedious, filthy job, but the journal was clear. Insulation was the armor against the cold. Master Thorne returned, this time with 2 of the town elders in tow. They stood like judges, their faces grim. Thorne pointed a thick finger at the strange, earth-sunk structure. "Boy, this has to stop," Thorne said, his voice leaving no room for argument. "You see this gap in your walls? The frost will get in there and turn any dampness to ice. It will heave your logs apart by midwinter. You'll be crushed." He then gestured toward the dense canopy of pine above. "And this placement? You're in a permanent shadow. Your cabin will never see a moment of direct sun. It will be a block of ice. The snow will weigh down those branches until they snap, and a limb the size of my leg will come through your roof like a cannonball." "You're building a tomb, boy," Thorne repeated, his voice softer now, laced with a frustrating sort of pity. "A cold, dark tomb." Elias simply looked at him, his face smudged with dirt, his hands stained with sap. He did not argue. He did not defend himself. He just met the older man's gaze and gave a slight, almost imperceptible shake of his head. Thorne's patience finally broke. He was a man used to being obeyed, his expertise never questioned. "I own the meadow next to this sorry plot," he said, his tone shifting from concern to business. "It's good land. I'll buy this piece from you, for a fair price. Enough to get you a room at the inn for the winter and a fresh start come spring. You can come work for me. I'll teach you how to build a real house, a proper house." It was a lifeline, an offer of rescue from his own foolishness. The elders nodded, approving of Thorne's generosity. "No, thank you," Elias said, his voice quiet but firm. "I trust my grandfather's way." The refusal hung in the air, an act of defiance that stunned the 3 men into silence. Thorne's face hardened. The offer was rescinded with a curt nod. He turned and walked away, the elders following in his wake. The boy was not just a fool, he was a stubborn one. He would be left to his fate. Not everyone saw only folly. A few days later, Anya, the blacksmith's daughter, appeared at his clearing. She carried his mended axe head, its edge honed to a razor sharpness. She was a quiet girl with observant eyes, and she did not mock him. She looked at the deep-set cabin, at the strange double walls, at the forest pressing in on all sides. "Why so deep in the ground?" she asked, her curiosity genuine. Elias found himself explaining. "The ground holds its warmth," he said, tapping the earthen wall of the pit. "It's warmer than the air in winter, and cooler in summer." "And the trees?" she asked, gesturing to the thick canopy. "They are a wall against the wind," he replied. "The wind is what carries the cold." She nodded slowly, considering his words. She did not seem to understand fully, but she accepted the logic within them. She saw purpose where others saw madness. Before she left, she handed him a small sack. "My mother sent some bread. You work too hard to forget to eat." From the high ridge to the west, another pair of eyes watched. Old Man Hemlock, a recluse who lived a solitary life, would sometimes stand for an hour, observing the boys' progress through a brass spyglass. He saw the digging, the careful placement of the logs, the way the cabin was becoming part of the forest. He would nod to himself, a slow, knowing gesture. He understood what the valley dwellers did not. The boy was not fighting the wilderness, he was joining it. Autumn began its slow surrender to winter. The first cold snap arrived, a week of freezing rain that coated every branch in a sheath of ice, and a wind that had the bite of a serpent. In the valley, the chimneys of the conventional cabins belched thick plumes of smoke day and night as families fed their hearths constantly, fighting a losing battle against the drafts that seeped through their walls. Elias's cabin was only half finished. He had a temporary roof of tarred canvas stretched over the rafters, and the window openings were covered with oiled hides. But even in its incomplete state, the difference was astounding. Inside, a small, efficient stove radiated a steady warmth. The earthen walls seemed to breathe the heat back into the small space. The pine thicket dismantled the wind, its roar reduced to a gentle shushing sound against the canvas. He sat with Ghost curled at his feet, comfortable in his shirt sleeves, while outside the world froze. He noticed he was using less than half the firewood he had anticipated. The small pile he had stacked was barely diminished. His grandfather's words echoed in his mind. A well-built house does not need a large fire. It needs to hold onto the warmth it is given. From the valley, Master Thorne saw the thin, almost non-existent trail of smoke rising from Elias's chimney. He pointed it out to others as proof of his prediction. "See?" he said with a grim satisfaction. "The boy can't even keep a proper fire going. The cold is bleeding out of the ground and stealing all his heat. He's freezing in that hole he's dug, too proud to admit his mistake." The community nodded. It was a sad story, but an expected one. The boy had been warned. A few days later, as the cold snap receded into a tense gray calm, Old Man Hemlock walked down from his ridge for the first time in years. His face was etched with an urgency that unsettled those he passed. He went straight to the tavern where Thorne and the other leaders were gathered. "The geese flew south a month ago," Hemlock said, his voice raspy from disuse. "The squirrels aren't just hoarding acorns, they're hoarding black walnuts, a bitter food for a bitter winter. And the mountain is groaning. A deep sound, a sound I haven't heard since the White Death of '58. He looked at each man, his eyes pleading. A killing winter is coming. Not a hard winter, but a killing one. A storm that will bury this valley. You need to reinforce your roofs, bank your walls, prepare for the worst." They listened, but they did not hear. They saw only a wild-eyed hermit, his mind addled by solitude. They offered him a drink, which he refused, and sent him on his way with placating words. A killing winter. The old man was losing his senses. The almanac predicted a mild season. The final and most crucial part of Elias's cabin was the roof. It was a design so counterintuitive that it looked like a mistake. He built not one roof, but two. First, a sturdy inner roof of thick planks, carefully sealed with pitch. Then, he built a second set of rafters directly above it, creating a gap of exactly 14 inches. On top of this second frame, he laid the outer roof, its pitch much steeper than any in the valley, almost 60 degrees. It was an enormous amount of extra work, a seeming waste of precious wood and time. This, the journal explained, was the secret to defeating the snow. The snow itself was a good insulator, a blanket. The problem was its weight. On a conventional roof, the heat escaping from the house would slightly melt the bottom layer of snow. This melted water would freeze again, creating a layer of ice that would glue the snowpack to the roof, allowing it to accumulate to crushing weights. The 14-inch air gap, the breath of the house, as his grandfather called it, would prevent this. The cold outside air would circulate within the gap, keeping the outer roof at the same temperature as the environment. Snow would land on a cold surface with no melting at its base. It would never bond to the roof. The steep pitch would then do the rest, allowing the dry, unbonded snow to slide off under its own weight. He finished the last plank just as the first true snowflakes of the season began to drift down from a sky the color of lead. The storm arrived on the 22nd of December. It did not come as a gradual worsening of the weather. It descended upon Blackwood Ridge like a judgment. Old Man Hemlock's prophecy became a terrifying reality. The wind struck first, a solid wall of force that shrieked down the valley. It was a physical presence, a battering ram that slammed into the south-facing homes. The temperature did not just drop, it plummeted. From a chilly 20 degrees to 10 below zero in an hour, then 20 below, then 40. It was a cold that was actively hostile, a cold that felt like it could shatter bone. Then came the snow. It did not fall in flakes. It came in horizontal sheets, a blinding, choking torrent of white that erased the world. It poured in like water through a broken dam, relentless and overwhelming. Visibility dropped to zero. The world became a roaring, white chaos. Inside their sturdy, conventional homes, the people of Blackwood Ridge realized that their structures were no match for this onslaught. The wind found every crack, every seam, turning their cabins into wind tunnels of icy drafts. Fires that roared in the hearths seemed to give off no heat, the warmth sucked away as quickly as it was generated. The real terror began on the second day. The snow, fine and dense as sand, was accumulating at an impossible rate, a foot, 2 feet, 5 feet. The shallow pitch of the conventional roofs was not shedding it. The weight was building, a silent, crushing pressure. A loud crack echoed through the valley, sharp and terrible even through the storm's howl. It was the main beam of a barn roof giving way, then another. Then the sound of splintering wood came from the homes themselves. The weight was too much. The roofs, so expertly built by Master Thorne, were failing. Thorne's own home, the largest in the valley, began to groan. He could hear the timber straining, the wood crying out in protest. His vast barn, a monument to his skill, had already collapsed, its roof caving in and killing his entire stock of winter cattle. Now his house was threatening to do the same. Windows on the windward side had shattered, blasted inward by the sheer force of the gale, and he had boarded them up with furniture. Drifts were piling up against his door, sealing him inside. His home had become a trap. Meanwhile, in the pine thicket, a profound and engineered silence reigned. Elias's cabin was a sanctuary of calm in the heart of the maelstrom. Outside, the ancient pines took the full force of the wind. Their branches bowed and swayed, absorbing the energy of the gale, breaking it down from a roar into 1,000 whispers. The snow piled deep around the earth-bermed walls, not as a threat, but as a blessing. 10 feet of it accumulated, burying the cabin completely, adding its own immense insulating power to that of the earth. Inside, the air was still. The small stove glowed with a steady, quiet warmth. Elias sat at his small wooden table, watching the needle on his grandfather's thermometer. It held unwavering at 67 degrees Fahrenheit. He fed a single small log into the stove every hour. Ghost slept peacefully by the hearth, untroubled by the world-ending fury outside. The double roof performed its function with silent perfection. The snow landed on the frigid outer surface and piled high. But with no heat escaping to melt its bottom layer, it remained light and unbound. Every few hours, with a soft, satisfying whoosh, a massive slab of accumulated snow would slide off the steep pitch and harmlessly into the deep drifts below. The structure never bore the full weight of the storm. It was a pocket of impossible warmth and safety, an island of life in an ocean of white death. Elias listened to the muffled roar of the wind, a distant thing that could not touch him. He was not just surviving the storm. He was living peacefully within it. He was vindicated, but there was no triumph in him, only a quiet confirmation of the old knowledge. The breaking point for Master Thorn came on the third day. A sound like a gunshot rang through his house as a main roof beam split from end to end. The ceiling sagged visibly. It was no longer a question of if the roof would collapse, but when. His family, his wife and 2 young children, were huddled in the one remaining warm room, wrapped in every blanket they owned. They were burning their chairs to stay alive. The fear in his children's eyes was a torment worse than the cold. His pride, his reputation, his certainty, it had all turned to ash. There was only one hope, a thought so humiliating it felt like swallowing glass. The boy, the fool. He made his decision. He wrapped himself in his heaviest furs, took up a heavy iron poker, and forced his way out a back window, for the doors were long buried. The storm hit him like a physical blow. The wind stole his breath, and the cold burned his lungs. He could not see more than 2 feet in front of him. He fought his way through waist-deep drifts, navigating by pure instinct, heading for the pine thicket he had once mocked. It was a journey of a few hundred yards that felt like 100 miles. He fell, he crawled, his beard froze solid to his face. He was guided only by the desperate image of his family freezing in their collapsing home. He finally stumbled into the relative calm of the pines. He saw it then, a single, warm, yellow light, shining from a window buried deep in a mountain of snow. A chimney, clear of snow, breathing a gentle plume of smoke into the maelstrom. It looked impossible. It looked like salvation. He pounded on the sturdy, low-set door with what remained of his strength, his frozen fists making a dull thud. "Elias," he croaked, his voice a raw shard of ice. "For the love of God, boy, help me." The door swung open. Elias stood there, framed in the warm light, dressed in a simple wool shirt. The wave of warmth that washed over Thorn was so intense it made him dizzy. It was a physical shock, the feeling of life itself. Elias looked at the fearsome Master Thorn, now a broken man covered in ice, his face a mask of frozen desperation. There was no mockery in the boy's eyes, no hint of triumph, only a calm, quiet compassion. "Please," Thorn choked out, the word tearing from his throat. "My family, my children, the roof." Elias did not hesitate. He simply nodded. "Bring them," he said. The journey back with his family was a waking nightmare, but the promise of that impossible warmth drove them on. Elias met them halfway, helping carry the youngest child. He led them into the cabin, into the stunning, unbelievable heat. Thorn's wife wept with relief. The children, their faces blue with cold, huddled by the stove, their small bodies slowly unthawing. Thorn himself could only stare, his builder's eye taking in the details he had once condemned. The earth-bermed walls, the deep-set windows, the ingenious roof structure visible in the open rafters. It was a masterpiece of design, born not of arrogance, but of profound understanding. Later, as they drank hot broth, Anya and her family arrived, their own roof having given way. Their shock and relief were just as profound. The small cabin was becoming a crowded ark. Thorn finally looked at Elias, his pride completely shattered, replaced by a deep and humbling awe. "How?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Everything I knew, it was wrong." Elias calmly explained the principles, his voice as steady as the warmth in the room. "My grandfather taught that you don't fight the winter, you use it. The earth remembers warmth, so you build into it. The wind is the enemy, so you hide from it behind the trees. The snow is a blanket, not a hammer, so you let it cover you." He pointed up at the ceiling. "And that is where the cold dies," he said, explaining the 14-inch air gap. "The heat from the house never touches the outer roof, so the snow never melts and sticks. It just slides away." It was a lesson delivered not in a lecture hall, but in a life raft. The great Master Thorne, the authority on all things built, sat as a humbled student before the 17-year-old boy he had ridiculed. He learned more in that hour about how to survive in this valley than he had in 40 years of building. Over the next day, more survivors found their way to the impossible cabin, a family whose chimney had collapsed, 2 trappers who had been caught in the open. By the time the storm finally broke on the 5th day, Elias's small cabin, a mere 432 square feet, was sheltering 19 people. It was crowded, but it was alive, a pocket of humanity that had weathered the White Death. When the sun finally emerged, it revealed a world transformed and devastated. Blackwood Ridge was a ruin. Roofs were collapsed, barns were flattened, and many homes were buried beyond recognition. The cost in life, both human and animal, was staggering. But from the great snowdrift in the pine thicket, 19 survivors emerged, blinking in the bright, cold light. In the days that followed Master Thorne, his authority, now derived not from pride, but from profound humility, stood before the remaining townsfolk. His voice was thick with emotion. "I was a fool," he announced, his words carrying across the snow-covered silence. "I was proud, and I was wrong. We put our faith in what we thought we knew, and it failed us." He turned and pointed toward Elias, who stood quietly to the side. This boy, with his grandfather's wisdom, built a house that understood the winter. He did not mock the storm. He listened to it. "He saved my family. He saved 19 of us. We will rebuild this valley, and we will build his way." Thorne became Elias's most devoted apprentice. The quiet, orphaned boy became the teacher of an entire community. Together they rebuilt Blackwood Ridge. They did not build on open ground, but on the sheltered slopes. They dug their foundations deep, sinking the new homes into the warm embrace of the earth. They planted new thickets of pine and spruce to serve as windbreaks for future generations. The pine-sunk cabin became the architectural standard. Every new home featured the double walls, the heavy insulation, and the ingenious double roof with its 14-inch air gap. The change was transformative. The valley's consumption of firewood dropped by more than 60%. The cabins were warmer in the winter, cooler in the summer, and silent against the wind. No home in Blackwood Ridge was ever again lost to a winter storm. The story jumps forward. Decades pass like seasons. Elias lived a long and respected life. He married Anya, the girl with the observant eyes, and their love was as quiet and sturdy as the homes he built. They raised 3 children and a dozen grandchildren, all of them born and raised in the warmth and safety of a pine-sunk house. Elias never boasted. He never reminded anyone of their past folly. He simply taught what he knew, sharing his grandfather's wisdom freely. He became the new Master Builder, a title he accepted with a quiet humility that Thorne had so painfully learned. He was a man who listened more than he spoke, who observed the way a tree bent in the wind or how the snow drifted on a hillside, always learning, always refining his craft. He died peacefully in his sleep at the age of 88 in the very cabin he had built as a ridiculed and stubborn boy. He passed from the world wrapped in the warmth he had drawn from the earth itself. Today, modern architectural science has given names to the principles Elias used: geothermal insulation, passive solar design, natural windbreaks, permaculture. Studies in thermodynamics have proven the efficacy of the ventilated double roof, a design now used in extreme cold weather environments around the world. The ancient ancestral wisdom contained in a dusty journal was vindicated not just by the survival of 19 people, but by the cold, hard data of future generations. The cabin still stands. It is a local landmark now, maintained by the Historical Society of a town that owes its existence to its design. Tourists come to see the strange little house buried in the pines, to feel the uncanny warmth and silence within its walls. Near the cabin, beneath a tall, weathered pine, is a simple fieldstone grave marker. The epitaph, carved by Master Thorne's own hand all those years ago, can still be read. It does not speak of buildings or storms. It speaks of a deeper truth. Elias. He listened to the earth, and it gave him its warmth.